And the talk today is going to be about my most recent publication, Signs of the Time: Nlaka'pamux Resistance Through Rock Art. It was published by UBC Press. The title kind of says it all. I'm going to be talking about this in a little more detail as I go on, but the signs of the time, the signs are these images of whatever in red ochre paint. Sometimes they're in size and things. And the time, these signs are historically contingent. So they were made during a certain time period. The time period we're talking about is the last 500 years. And Nlaka'pamux resistance through rock art. We're going to discuss, rock art is resistance? Well, yeah, definitely. Because rock art is more than an art, it's actually a tool that people use during the last 5 centuries to help mitigate and negotiate the incredible changes that were coming to the land. And I'll be talking about the art, and I'll also be talking about the place. It's a very famous place we'll be talking more about, called Coyote Rocks, just west of Spencer Bridge. And you'll find that there's an inextricable connection between the imagery and the rock and the rock surfaces where they painted. In fact, the rock art is almost secondary. It's later in the history of these ancient places. So historically contingent. So this is the this map shows the Nlaka'pamux territory, and you see it's a huge territory. It goes down into the United States. The red line here denotes the core territory, and this green sort of line, it's not that easy to see, shows an area that was used by Nlaka'pamux and other nations together. And their territory is very diverse, river valleys, high mountains, glaciers, and dry plateau area, particularly in the eastern portions of the nation. And for those who want a little orientation, that is the town of Lytton, Nlaka'pamux, which is, the last town there burned down, 3 years ago. But Nlaka'pamux is an ancient place. It's the center of the Nlaka'pamux world. It's located at the confluence of the Thompson and Fraser rivers, and it's a place where Coyote sun went up to the heavens, and brought down the knowledge that Nlaka'pamux people needed to survive in the world. And that's why Nlaka'pamux, very important place. And the Nlaka'pamux people, the chiefs, 160 years ago, described this territory as a house. And the house, and Nlaka'pamux was the center of the house, and the 4 posts denoted the entire territory. But you see, it's a huge territory. There's about 4,000 Nlaka'pamux, and they're divided into 4 or 5 different groups, culturally and linguistically kind of different, but they're all Nlaka'pamux. And so this is my study area. Just you can see all these little red dots everywhere. These are known rock art locations where you find maybe pictographs or petroglyphs, and they're often found along travel corridors, river valleys, and you can see there's quite a few of them, but there's probably twice as many that we haven't located. Not advancing, just a sec. Thing. Oh.
Sorry, we'll just. There we go.
Okay, thanks. Going to the next slide.
So it's a bit. There we go.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, awesome.
It times out a little bit. So
Yeah, I'll use this thing. Okay, thank you. So how do we learn about this rock art? Up in the top, we have a little image of a pictograph in red ochre on a granite surface. And here's the Stein River Valley, where I did a lot of work. There's a lot of rock art sites along this valley. So there's the physical remnants, but also the people. And this is a congregation of St. David's of Stein, which is located on the west side of the Fraser, across from Lytton. And this was taken about 1960. And I was fortunate to work with some of these people in this picture. And so the Nlaka'pamux. just stand here so you can hear me
Yeah.
better. Okay, thank you. Okay, so where do we get the information? You know, this is the case throughout British Columbia. We have incredible cultural and historical continuity between the Indigenous people and the places. So, you know, you can go to these places that people haven't left, they haven't been moved anywhere else, and they still possess lots of information about these places, if you ask the right questions. So oral traditions, oral history, very important. One of the best sources we have for understanding Nlaka'pamux rock art is the work of James Alexander Tate, who is from one of those islands, Shetland, thank you. And this is his wife, Lucy Anko. So he came to BC in the 1880s, and he met this woman, Lucy Anko from Spence's Bridge area, and she introduced him to the Nlaka'pamux culture and language. And within a very short time, he mastered the language and became very interested in the work. Franz Boas, you know, the greatest anthropologist of the day in North America, saw the potential in James Tate's work and immediately engaged him to do research for him. And, you know, he was just an amazing man. In addition to everything else he did, you know, rancher, big game guide, he had all this time to write up some of the best, you know, ethnographic information we have on the BC interior peoples. Another excellent source for us was Annie York, late Annie York, Zetko of Spence's Bridge. Annie has worked with a lot of Indigenous scholars, Indigenous scholars and non-Indigenous scholars, because she's an Nlaka'pamux scholar and expert in native plants and language, and she's an amazing woman. She didn't go to the residential school. She apparently had enough white ancestry to keep her out or something. But anyway, she stayed at home and instead got her education through helping out her relatives and the elders and just being in place and learning from the land. You know, she grew up and lived in Spence's Bridge Spuzzum all her life. And she worked with Richard Daly in the 90s. Or early 80s, sorry, or 80s and 90s. And Richard got a hold of some drawings that I had made of all the Stein River paintings on behalf of the Nlaka'pamux Nation Development Corporation. And she began to read these drawings. She had a lot of information about rock art that was passed on to her by her elders. And she, you know, was just a fountain of knowledge. And she mentioned something that really struck me. And she, you know, James Tate, when he did his work, there were still people around who knew about the rock art and who actually made it themselves in the context of puberty ceremonies. But Annie York, she talked about that a little bit, but she really focused on the role of the prophets. These are these individuals, men and women, who beginning around, you know, a few centuries ago, began to have premonitions and experiences and dreams about the changes that were coming to the world, especially their part of the world. And so these prophets, they actually, some of them died and went to heaven. And then, you know, some of them even visited Europe in their dreams and came back and told the people there's big changes coming and we better, you know, do things, take proactive measures to mitigate this, this catastrophic change that's coming down the pipe. And the teachings of the prophets was basically to hold on to your oral traditions, your practices, and places, because you need to know all this information, your spiritual training, in order to negotiate the big changes that were coming. So that was a big insight for me. She mentions, oh, these paintings were done by prophets. What was, you know, what time period were they working in? It was within the last 500 years. So in the early 90s, with Annie York, Richard Daly, and myself, we put together and published this book on They Write Their Dreams on the Rock Forever, where we looked at her teachings about the rock art in relationship to the Stein River Valley. Stein River Valley is a very important place. And that book came out in 91 or 93. And the one on the right is a recent reissue of it by Talon Books. It's a little slimmer and a little more, trimmed out some of the fat from the earlier one. And I've changed some of my thinking about the rock art because in the meantime, I did that back in the 90s. Worked on that in the 90s, but in between that, I went back to UBC, got my PhD, and I did a lot of archaeological work on these sites, which helped to transform my ideas about them and to nail down the time period in which a lot of this art was produced. So what about this? So I'm talking about this art being a recent phenomena, some of it, but not all of it. It's a very ancient practice. And it's kind of, I hope you can see the word up there. That's Quickwell, who was a transformer. He was an individual who appeared on the land and traveled throughout the Nlaka'pamux territory, basically making the place safe and secure for the people. And he transformed various monsters and cannibal beings into rocks, and he basically created biodiversity. So all the little animals, the birds we see today, the trees and that, all used to be people who were transformed in their present forms by the transformer. And so this is, as he's going up the Fraser Canyon, he stopped at this place, just north of Yale, by Lady Franklin Rock, and he noticed the people down there fishing really weird. They were kind of holding each other by the legs, and the guys were trying to grab the fish out of the water. He said, "Oh, this won't do. Won't do." So he sat down and began to think. This is from James Tate's interview with the Nlaka'pamux elder. So he sat down and began to think. There was a rock in front of him, and he scratched it with his fingernails. With each scratch, a thought came into the heads of the people, and they gained knowledge. And these are the marks made by the transformer, Quickwell, at this site. And but these are petroglyphs. So these are markings made in rock. But rock art also includes any images made on rock. So these are petroglyphs, and they're very ancient, and they mark very important places. But question mark. That should be a C with a little line on top of it. Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. See a C there. That word is sok, and that is the word given to these markings. And here's some very simple ones in red paint on a rock in the Nicola Valley. There's 4, 5, vertical lines, the width of a finger, red ochre paint. And on the right, I just show for comparison markings made by a grizzly bear in the Stein River Valley. They made markings too. Like humans, animals are all, qualitatively equivalent. The images vary in substance or iconography. These are from the Similkameen Valley on the left. You can see these are better preserved. These paintings over time eventually wear away because they're on granite subsurfaces, and granite slowly erodes over time, and it actually just starts to fall away. And if there's paint on the granite surface, it will fall away too. So sometimes you visit these sites and all you have left is just a faint stain. But these ones are relatively well preserved. On the left, you can see a human-like figure, and on the right, this has been described as a grizzly bear track. Some of these are conventional signs where everybody knew the meaning to a point. Other signs where only the person who made the images understood the exact meaning of it, because a lot of the information about these images came from dreams, but they were used by people who had this knowledge to help the people. So those images there are pretty small. They're, 6 inches tall, high or so. But here's a rock in the Similkameen Valley. You can see that large image in that area surrounded by lichen. And that's more than 1 meter high, a large sort of standing figure, very similar to some coastal images. So they can range in size from these small little figures, which are the norm, to very large images like this. And images also appear in other media. It's not just, there's the proper lettering, sok. And you can see we've got images on the shield there, the man on the left. We've got images painted on an apron. We've got image incised on an elk jawbone, and painting on the body. Other images on various tools and art implements. These are all sok, and they all had similar functions and meaning to the rock art. So the rock art that we're looking at wasn't limited just to images on rock. It appeared everywhere. So the important thing about these images became very powerful when they're used with this substance, hummel. And this is from a very famous quarry outside of Princeton called Zutzman. And that word zut refers to the compressed strata. You can see it on this slide on the right. You can see all those layers of beautiful red paint. And you can see it here where people have been gathering the paint, the really fine paint from a certain layer there. And on the left, you can see those rectangular holes in the cliff. Those are other areas where people have quarried this paint, and they still do it today. Like, it's a very important place for the Nlaka'pamux, and people actually come from all over to gather the paint from this site. And this site was significant to Nlaka'pamux because this is where Coyote finally turned back the transformers. The transformers had come up from the coast. They were traveling all through the river valleys, and they were having various contests, and we'll talk about one in a bit. But here, Coyote sent the transformer back from his journeys in the interior. So I think that had something to do with the significance of paint from this place. And what is the significance of the paint? It's about protection, physical and spiritual protection. Indigenous people all over, even in our own cultures in Europe and that, used to cover their whole bodies with red paint or with red iron oxide because it had good physical properties, you know, health benefits, but also it gave spiritual protection. So what are they worried about? What do they want to be protected from? Smallpox, and the accompanying, you know, changes. So smallpox, this is a really cool spatial temporal map made by an archaeologist named Eric Jones, showing the documented spread of smallpox from its origin in Florida here about 1518, where it wiped out about 4 million people, and then slowly in 100 years, and then kept moving this way, inexorably west. And then, you know, kind of stalled here. You see, it didn't hit our area until the late 18th century. And on the left, we have a map done by, what's the name of the stadium? Oh, gosh. Cole Harris, a great geographer, showing the epidemic of 1782, which came down the Columbia River and then up through Puget Sound into our area here, a little ways up Waututh, up to Cape Mud, and then a little ways up the Fraser River. But in the wake of this epidemic, 9 out of 10 people died. That's some of the highest estimates that we had. But it was a devastating epidemic. And so people in the West became aware of what was going on here. Just through dreams, through communications maybe from relatives and long distance trade fairs. They knew what was going on in the rest of the world. And this is when the prophets began to emerge to take proactive measures to try and mitigate this coming catastrophe. So how did they do this? One way was through the ghost dance. The prophets began introduced a dance, a circular dance that they believed would help prepare the people, make them strong for the coming changes. And Leslie Spear, who was one of the first academics to kind of document the ghost dance, made this interesting map here showing the extent of it in the Northwest. And over on the left, we have a map done by John Corner, who was an early researcher on rock art here in the 60s. And you can see his diagram of the pictograph distribution in British Columbia pretty well matches the distribution of the prophet cult. So the two are happening at the same time. One is the expression of the other. The pictographs the red pictographs we're going to be looking at are very closely connected to the ghost dance, which was, again, individuals preparing the people for the big changes that were coming. So how did they do this? Throughout the territories of Nlaka'pamux are these places called slime. And they are, we drive by them all the day, don't even know what they are. They're big, huge, unusual rock outcroppings, unusual boulders. And in the pre-contact times, all of these had stories associated with them and teachings associated with them. So they're very important places. And the prophets began to mark these places as significant. Not all of them, not all of them. So you'll have slime, all kinds of different ones, but they only marked certain ones. And I'll have some thoughts about why they marked some and didn't mark others in a bit. But anyway, and they would mark them with the and then people later would return to these sites and make their own markings, but they deliberately marked these places so that people knew where they were. And so they could rediscover the teachings and the importance of these places. I think that was a major part of the prophet's role was to select these places, mark them for future generations, because, things were changing. Here's some in the Similkameen Valley along the road. And all these roads here, of course, are Indigenous highways. And a lot of these rock formations are found along the Indigenous highways because this is where the transformers traveled in ancient times, running into all kinds of characters and turning them into boulders. And often the boulders retain some of the shape of the critter, the person, whoever it was who was turned to stone. So that's an important feature of these sites too. When you go to them, forget about the painting, just look back and you'll see all kinds of features in the rock that are significant and a clue to what that rock was about. So here we have just a bunch of examples, and there's probably hundreds of these sites all over, but not all of them are marked with paintings. Now, this is one of the most, so how do we know that these places had stories and names? Well, thanks to James Tate. He interviewed elders who taught him about some of the significance of these sites. Now, this is a place like Coyote Rocks, which is just east of Spence's Bridge. Here's the old Nlaka'pamux highway. This is now the Trans-Canada Highway. This looks very different today. And some of the rocks are still there, but some have been destroyed. This was a site where Coyote and his wife were having a sort of a picnic. They had their basket kettle there and they were cooking some food. Transformer came up the river, Thompson River, and they had a contest here, of course. And they're just kind of zapping each other, whatever supernatural beings do. And the transformer was trying to transform the coyote and his wife into rocks, but he was not successful. Well, he was partly successful. He managed to change the penis of the coyote into a rock, and the vulva of the coyote's wife into a rock, and their basket kettle into a rock. But that was it. So they look at the scale of wins and losses. The coyote came out ahead of this. Anyway, this place became very important. And we're going to look at two rocks here that are painted. Now, this is interesting, and it kind of makes me think that some of these paintings were kind of gender specific, or the sites were gender associated with them, because the coyote's penis has no markings on it whatsoever, no paintings. But the coyote's, the vulva of the coyote's wife and her basket kettle are covered with paintings. So that's interesting. The female rocks here are painted, but the male ones aren't. Oh, and that's the name of the coyote's penis. This is Nlaka'pamux, the vulva of the coyote's wife. And Sahaha means taboo thing. So I don't know if Boaz is being careful or they're being polite, but referring to the power of a woman's genitalia. And here you can see the vulva of the coyote's rock. And you can see there almost a naturalistic shape of the vulva on the rock, and all the paintings are here on the left. And those are the paintings that James Tate recorded on the specific rock. So we have this invaluable work that he did. He went out and actually drew a lot of the rock art at these sites, in addition to recording the story of the place. So super interesting and important. The other rock down there is let's see, Nڵaka'pamux, the basket of Coyote's wife. And here's the basket here, and you can see the images on it, painted on it. And this rock is one of the other rare rocks where you have information about what this rock was about. And so it goes, blah, blah, blah. The father of mysteries gave Mrs. Coyote this wonderful kettle made of coiled basketwork. It could hold water and cook food, but of such greater importance, it had the magic power to grant the wishes of its owner and to protect her from danger. The precious gift possessed another amazing property. If by chance Mrs. Coyote was injured, a sweet herb or flower or fine shade tree instantly sprung up to heal the wound. So this rock has information in it that would be valuable to people. And so this is why it was marked. This is why people went back there to learn what they could from the place. These are the paintings that James Tate recorded on this rock, and he offered interpretations for some of them. that were related to the puberty ceremonies of boys and girls, but there were some images there that nobody knew the meaning of. So these might have been earlier images created by the prophets. There's another famous rock outside of Spence's Bridge called Nslʔkepmx. We don't know what that word means, so I just put it there in bold, but one day we'll find out. So this is a rock, a granite boulder that was used by young women in their puberty ceremonies in the 19th century. And James Tate, who did this drawing here, and here's a digitally enhanced image that I did of the rock. We're using this algorithm that can bring out all the colors in the rock, even if they're super faded. So you can compare it to James Tate's image pretty close. But the amazing thing about this place was that James Tate went and his first scientific publication was on this rock art site. And he used the information from a local woman, Washco. So instead of, guessing what he's saying, but, oh, it's some war party, you're making up some story, because you can make up all kinds of stories by looking at this stuff. But he got information from a woman who actually had made paintings in her youth. And so we have, this is all in the book, all these images are numbered and explained. And a really important piece of work. And this image was noticed by John Corner in his work, and it was an image that was painted after James Tate did his work in the 1880s. So that image there dates from a later period, showing that the practice of rock art, at least in the context of puberty ceremonies, continued up into the 20th century. And these sites are important for other things. There's offerings left here, and there's always tons of medicinal plants around these places. I was hoping to do a postdoc on that, but they didn't think it was a good idea. The powers be, whatever. Here's another rock at Spence's Bridge. We don't know where this rock is. The big sister. That's the name of that rock. And that rock was a big sister to somebody. And these are two sets of paintings that appear on the rock, recorded by James Tate. And this rock, like I said, no one knows where it is, but somewhere around the Nicola Spence's Bridge area. And again, James Tate had access to expert information about it. So if you look at these images, you might go, oh, that looks like some sort of person, I can sort of see arms or an anthropomorphic thing. Could be further from the truth. Those are utensils, cedar bark towel, a drinking tube, and a little cup. These are important articles that are used by young women in their puberty ceremonies and recorded by them on this rock in two events. This one here was on one side, and this painting was done on the other side, probably by two different people, two separate events. Here's another important place just north of Ashcroft called Nslʔkepmx, which is in the Oregon Jack Park, whatever it is. And you can see this vaulting limestone cliff with the old Nlaka'pamux highway going right down in front of the cliff and then passing up along it beside all of the paintings. And over there on the left, a lot of these sites, people were attracted to physical features in the rock, like cracks, washes of carbonate, silica deposits, and algae. And over there, you can see that drippy black thing. That's some gooey algae that's coming out of a crack in the rock. And on either side of it, there's tons of paintings. But you can't see them very well because they're faded and they're covered with limestone deposit. And on the right, we have some other paintings from this area. And this site has a story associated with it about a man who was marooned here by his poor friend who left him there to die. But a couple of golden eagles raised him and fed him. And then when he was strong enough, he flew them back to the village where he exacted horrible revenge on the one who left him here. But he also had the power of the golden eagle. And we see a golden eagle image. I think it's a golden eagle just because of its the feathers on the top of its head, which may have something to do with that story. And you see this at some of these sites where we know the stories. You can sometimes see images on the rocks that relate to these stories. And Tate described this place too. He didn't focus so much on these particular paintings, which are the most visible ones. he looked at some paintings way up a draw next to the site, little shelters that were all used by people in their puberty ceremonies, but he didn't talk about this one, which is interesting because he didn't talk about every site. He didn't mention them all. He wasn't trying to be comprehensive or anything. And when I worked in this area, I was informed this place was used by Shwagnan, shaman. It was a very important place for their activities. This is a very important site in the Similkameen Valley. It probably has one of the largest collections of rock art. Chuchaweca. And I got to give a shout out to Mandy Jimmy, who provided a lot of the transcriptions for the words in the book, because there's quite a glossary in that book of Nlaka'pamux for you to study. And so this place is very important because it is one of the 4 posts of the Nlaka'pamux territory, very important place. And some people suggested that some of these posts, like this one, were marked by paintings. This is definitely marked by paintings, but there's 3 other ones surrounding the interior or the Nlaka'pamux territory. And here we have some more details of the paintings. And these ones are very well preserved because they're under a steep overhang. You see in the middle there, the incredible crazy rock formation that is evocative of shapes. And you hang out of the place and look at the rock surface, you can see all kinds of things. But you can see our work site right at the bottom. And I spent a couple of seasons down there excavating in the subsurface deposits at this particular site. Oops. Oh, now I can't. That was funny. It's just my fingers. Okay, so these are probably the most famous paintings at this particular place. Some of you may have heard of them, and they've been interpreted over the years. They've been called the prisoner paintings. And people say, oh, it shows some lost Spanish column, marching through BC. And here they've got the natives, they're tied together by the neck, surrounded by dogs. We're going to go torture them or do something. But that's not how you read rock art. You don't read rock art this way. And thanks to the work of Grant Keddy, who's a curator here at the museum, past curator, he had information from some old timers in the Similkameen Valley who told him that this painting here was painted in 1870 by a man named Francois Tomar on his vision quest. And you can see the differences in the paint, but these were done probably way earlier, after 1740, because that's when the horse was introduced to the Similkameen. And you can see they're different. This image is bolder and thicker line. This one's got a sketchier line, but it's definitely copying that image. This one's completely different. But what you have here, instead of one composition, you have 3 different compositions. Chuchaweca, like a lot of these sites, has very old deposits. So this is the thing. These sites are ancient places because they date back to the transformer times. But the rock art is more recent in the history of the place. So for example, this site, we've got a layer here of volcanic ash dating to 3,500 years ago. And there's cultural deposits under that. And, but most of the, anyway, very rich site. But a lot of the ochre is mostly concentrated in the upper levels. And the rock paintings themselves are all date within, I believe, the last 500 years or so, even more recently. And of course, at these sites, you don't just find ochre and artifacts and things. You find a lot of faunal material. And this is a Corylus cornuta, the hazelnut. And hazelnuts don't grow in the Similkameen Valley. So these were traded in, probably from the Fraser Canyon, where hazelnuts were a really important part of the Indigenous diet. So now we're moving into we're jumping all around the Nlaka'pamux territory. Now we're in the Stein River Valley. And we're going to look at a place where I worked at and got a lot of material for my PhD. It's called Suk. So you can see that word Suk is in there, and then it's just duplicated for the plural. So this is markings, paintings. And you can see the Stein River Valley going there. And this site that we're going to look at is located at the base of this tall vertical cliff. And you see the river just skirts right along in front of it. And the site is characterized by these, formations that have sort of features. I mean, I was there once with a native guy looking up. We could just see these tall, sort of colossal giants standing there. And this is what we fancied was the head of one of them. But this is very kind of typical of these places that they have these anthropomorphic forms. These places are kind of dangerous. I mean, they're dangerous spiritually, but they're also dangerous physically because this is an eroding granite cliff. And you can see these big slabs here of granite. That was the roof of a collapsed rock shelter. So that used to be, you know, vertical or horizontal, sticking out. And underneath those slabs, they're covered with paintings. And so this is a really great place to work, and but daunting, because when I first went there, it's a north-facing cliff. Most of the rock art sites that we've been looking at are south-facing, so they're not wet and damp. This had just like tons of water flowing down it. The paintings are inundated with water. Like you go there in the winter, they reveal themselves to you, but in the summertime, they're very difficult to see. But anyway, I mapped this entire site and recorded about 192 painting events. And I determined that on the basis of similarities of style and stuff. So 192 different painting events here, just by going around photographing it and then running them all through the D-stretch. And I'll show you some of our results. So this painting is a huge painting. It's almost a meter square, and it's about 3 meters up, 2 meters, 3 meters up on a vertical, you know, cliff surface. And the beauty of this D-stretch, you know, you can bring it out. And there's this incredible image. This is one of the striking images of the BC interior. I think it represents a ghost, a dead person. But it's a very central image there. And you can see the superpositioning. Look at his arm on the right. It's overlapping an earlier marking. And so there's a great opportunity to say, and I explored it a bit in the graphic stratigraphy of paintings, where you can, once you use this technology, you can see how they overlap. So you can get a sequence over time. Here's another granite wall. Doesn't look like much is there. You can just see faint traces of this and that. But when you use the D-stretch algorithm, brings out the image. So in the Annie York book, I did a drawing of this painting, and it's nothing like this. I mean, there's references there, but this is really the acid test, the foolproof way to document these sites. And speaking of documentation, the best way to document them is to photograph them and record them like this, because in a number of years, they're going to be gone because of erosion. The best preservation is documentation. So here's this big site looking downstream. You can see the river there. So it's very close to the river. When you're here, the river just reverberates off the cliff. Like there's all kinds of, you know, your voices singing. I mean, it has a crazy acoustic properties, but don't try camping there at night. No way. And you can see this is how the paintings kind of look to the naked eye. You can see sort of a sunburst up there, and then a kind of a grizzly bear paw. The sunburst here overlaps that grizzly paw. So there's two separate paintings here. Here's another image, famous one to those that know about the Battle of Save the Stein. And this is another really interesting phenomena that you find pretty everywhere in the BC interior, where someone has made an earlier image, like this one I presume is earlier because it's faded and a little more elaborate. It's very different, but the same subject, I think. And then this one was done later. So you'll see this copying, where someone will make an image, and then someone else will come along and make another image, and that's it. No third images except for one exception, which I'll show in a bit. And you find this pattern all through the interior. So this again narrows the time frame of the production of this phenomenon. Here we have a D-stretch on the left showing these two warrior figures. The one on the top seems to have a bow and possibly carrying a shield. And you compare the line. They're two different artists. One up here, thinner line, more detail, rougher line, but better preserved because it's done later. And this is what the paintings look like today on the right. So it depends on the light and the various things, and sometimes they're more visible, sometimes not. Here's just a D-stretch image that shows more recent paintings in the darker pigment overlapping earlier paintings in kind of a purpley pattern of two very interesting kind of star-shaped images. Okay, the one exception, I talked about these repeating images. This is the only one I know in the whole BC interior. So you have like On the left here, you can see the big slab up there. It's kind of what it looks like in real life. And then here's a digitally enhanced image with an image that I excavated out of that image using what you can see here. Two grizzly bears, one there, and then someone did a third one. And this third one, as you can see, has been repainted. And I was up here with a cultural worker from Mount Currie Band, and he said it was a recent paint or had been added onto. So people were coming back to these places and adding their own red ochre onto this paint. But now I want to talk about the excavations we did at these sites. So right here beneath this huge slab, which is the last remaining slab of the rock shelter, the other ones are here and falling down. We did a tiny excavation in here, and it was very complicated because there's a lot of rock fall, so you're really limited to the space you can use. But so we excavated a very like a 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter unit down only about 20 centimeters to sterile. And danger, we're working under this thing, which I don't know, weighs a few tons, and it was ready to fall because of cracks. It's only a matter of time. It could be collapsed now. And in fact, since I've worked in the Stein, I've noticed a lot of sites are huge sections of the sites have crashed off and fallen in the river, and the paintings are just sitting in the river now and fading away. So here's our little excavation. You see it's a funky shape, but we're trying to do a lot in the small space we had. And you get an idea of the stratigraphy, lots of very fine stratigraphy, and it was loaded with cool stuff. And you can see the remains of a little hearth there on the sterile soil, directly beneath that huge slab that we're looking at. So what do we find in this stratigraphy? All kinds of stuff. We use a 3mm screen, which I picked up at Mowat's on Salt Spring on the way up. I said, oh, we need a screen, better get one. So I ran and got a 3mm sieve, which was perfect because we captured a lot of stuff. Chunks of red ochre and a piece of Alaris occidentalis, which is the Western tamarack pitch, which Annie York talked about being used as a paint ingredient. And we found fragments of shell. We didn't find this here. This is from a burial somewhere else. But we found fragments of this pectin, Patinopectin caurinus, the scallop, and which was used as a rattle, in the historic period. It's a very important part of the Tsleil-Waututh dance. So we found tiny fragments at the site in the Stein, the one at Chicheweeta, and this one here at Kaique Creek. And you see that somebody had rattles there and bits broke off, as they do, and we found traces of that at the site. So there's an interesting correspondence there, possibly between Tsleil-Waututh related rituals and other activities at these sites. Will you test on all that? No. This is just the fauna and flora that we found. We found little bits of like fish, little bits of cracked bone, and lots of plant material. That because people went to these places, if you're hanging out and fasting and stuff, you don't need a lot of food and stuff. In fact, you're not supposed to. So there's very little in the way of faunal remains at these places. People weren't going here and having picnics and things. And this was something I found very interesting. So this is my little. These are from 3 different units in that little unit that we dug, going from the top level, which is 1 to 4 centimeters. We did about 2 centimeter levels, not very much, down to 12 centimeters. And this is these tiny little bits of debitage, which are the leftover remains of a tool making. The sharpening and making tiny little tools here. I speculated for bloodletting because that was an important part of traditional practice, spiritual practices. And it's interesting to look here, you'll see, the same kind of consistent debitage all the way up. And then when you get near the top, you find a lot of glass debitage because people are incorporating glass into this ancient technology because glass is a very nice raw material for making.
All the people that are in there.
What? Another important thing we found from the site was radiocarbon dating. So that little unit that I showed you earlier, we got 4 radiocarbon dates all in a nice sequence between dating from approximately 1562 to 1810. Again, and this is down to sterile. So this shows you activities that were occurring at this place within the last 500 years. And this is a comparison of a rock art site at Kaique, where we did a similar excavation, and we found two dates that sort of fall within this 500-year period, and then an older date, because people were using these sites a long time ago, but not necessarily making paintings there. So I kind of got into this work because of the threat to the Stein Wilderness Valley. So back in the 80s, this dates from fall 1985. It was just like I said, in danger of immediate destruction, and it really was, because all of the valleys in the Fraser Canyon had been logged out, and they were desperate to get more timber. And the Stein hadn't been logged because it was so inaccessible. It was on the wrong side of the river, or on across from Lytton. But the thing that really protected the Stein was the access, because in order to get at the wealth of timber, and there's huge trees up in the Middle Valley, but you had to pass through this long granite canyon. It's about 5 miles long, very steep-sided, and this is where a lot of the most important rock art sites were located. So I was fortunate to be able to work with the Lytton Indian Band, the Mount Currie Indian Band, which they were called in those days, and just documenting the cultural information, the cultural importance of the place, so that those in positions of power could make the right decisions, which I'm glad they finally did. But during this, and I worked with Wendy on this, we had a lot of fun times interviewing people who didn't speak English, some of them. We'd go to a house and the old lady come out, she only spoke Nlaka'pamux. So it was really interesting and fascinating. And so this rock is probably a well-known site. This was never in any danger of destruction, but it's probably the best known site of the Stein. It's right near the entrance. People call it the prayer rock. And traditionally people go by here and ask permission to enter the valley, pray. And it's also one of these slime. It's a very weird looking rock, kind of looks like a big skull. And inside it's got these alcoves with this white sort of precipitate, which is the color of ghosts. And you can see the red paintings there arranged around the different fissures in the rock. And we know from the early ethnographic work that people used to come here and lie in these natural hollows at the base of the paintings. And they had fir bough beds. And these were used up until the 20s. And there's a story about this place too, about these paintings containing prophecy of the railway. And a man told a person I knew that he said, "See those 3 lines? He said, the first one, that's the CPR. The second one, that's the CN. When the third one's built, it'll be the end of the world." So they're taking prophecy seriously, especially with their experience with railways. So the Steins, this sort of battle went on for about 10 years, but they could not enter the Stein because of this site. So their plan was to build a logging haul road along the top of the cliff here. So that's the cliff. 192 Canadians, and they're all this incredibly sacred, important site. And we used to go to meetings, and they would just say, "Well, don't worry, the rock's all going to fall off and land in front of the site." It's just crazy because they didn't have the knowledge, of the significance of these places. It's not the paintings. The paintings are secondary. In fact, I've become less interested in them and way more interested in the places, because that's where the real information is. That's where the real knowledge is, the real protection. And so you can see here the base of the site. We're going to dump rocks on and destroy. I mean, it just was insane. And so I think this was a major obstacle to the destruction of the valley. And I like to think that it has something to do with the proactive measures of the prophets way back, and marked this place as an important place for people to visit and learn from. And they did. They went back there and learned from it. And the paintings ultimately protected the entire valley from destruction. So when you visit rock art sites, and I'm sure some of you have seen them, especially the ones with these red ochre paintings, forget about the paintings for a bit. Just step back and look up at that Biggie's rock face and try to figure out what it is. You'll see something. You'll see right away that the place is more than these paintings. So you got to consider that. You got to consider the rock, twine, which has stories and traditions. And I think they could be revived. I think that people could go back here and dream and rediscover the nature of these places if they're left alone. So you have the rock, and then the art. So rock art. A lot of people don't like that term. I mean, it's just an English translation of stuk or whatever. But I kind of like it because if you think of it as encompassing both these things, the place and the imagery, then you're on the right track to understanding what it's all about. And that's my talk.